Today's reading comes from Matthew chapter 5. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Several years ago, I lived in a Nicaraguan community in Costa Rica running an after-school program for kids. My friend Marcy often cooked for me in between sessions, and I really loved her version of gallo pinto, which is rice and beans. When I asked her how to make it, she said, "Oh, it's easy. Just put the cooked rice and beans in a pan and mix them up." Now, for context, just before living in Costa Rica, I had been trying to eat healthier by cooking on nonstick pans and using less or no oil and salt. This was before I found out that we need pretty much everything in moderation and before we knew that PFAS was so bad for us. So I did exactly what Marcy said. I boiled the beans into oblivion, cooked the rice, and then put the cooked rice and beans in a nonstick frying pan with no oil or salt and heated them up. It was positively awful. My brother, who was visiting, couldn't even pretend my cooking was okay. And we ate something else. When I told Marcy how badly my cooking had turned out and wondered aloud why hers was so much better, she took the time to explain a little further. "Well, you take the onion and the garlic and fry it in some oil and salt and then put in the beans and then the rice last. Then you have to keep adding oil until it looks right and taste it while you're cooking. Then you'll know whether there's enough salt." Over the course of the next year, I cooked often with Marcy at lunchtime and learned a huge amount from her. One of the biggest things: don't skimp on the stuff that delivers flavor, because those are the things that make the food worth eating. I'm not sure I've ever encountered salt that has lost its saltiness, and I'm pretty sure it's chemically impossible. I found out from a colleague that the salt Jesus would have been familiar with, which would have come from the Dead Sea, forms in alternating deposits of salt and another substance called gypsum that looks like salt but isn't. It's a false salt, if you will. So salt that isn't salty hasn't lost its taste. It's just fake. I wonder how often we try to hide ourselves from others. Sometimes it's easier to act like someone else, to shrink back from who we really are or from our true calling in order to make sure we're not calling too much attention to ourselves or making too much of a fuss. We might try to take up less space, or we might try to be who we think other people want us to be, or we might try to blend in enough not to be noticed. In the same way that fake salt doesn't deliver what's needed, hiding a candle under a bushel seems like a dangerous proposition. Either the candle is going to get snuffed out, or you are going to get a raging, uncontrollable fire. The only good solution is to let the candle burn brightly, shining its light on everything around it. Both of Jesus' metaphors today tell us about living in context. Neither salt nor light are meaningful unless they're surrounded by other things. I don't know about you, but I don't go to my salt and just grab handfuls of it to snack on. And a bright light shining in a room with no features can be disorienting or blinding. Both salt and light are at their most meaningful when they are surrounded by other things. Salt brings out the flavor. A little extra salt brings my chocolate chip cookies from meh to irresistible, if I do say so myself. Gentle light in the morning or evening serves as a transition from one part of the day to the next. The sun on a winter morning makes the snow sparkle. Stars on a dark night are spectacular because they are set apart by the deep darkness they illuminate. Salt and light help us notice what is around them. They are not the central feature, but they help our own senses interpret and appreciate what is around them. Too often we try to take up less space, but the faithful witness of our baptismal calling includes inviting people and ourselves into authentic community. And that takes vulnerability. Sometimes it's much easier to pretend I'm someone I'm not in order to be who I think people think I should be. Sometimes those of us who have learned to protect ourselves with certain behaviors neglect to put those behaviors aside once they're no longer helpful. But when we are actually living into our baptismal calling, we approach the world with grace and patience and compassion, understanding that fierce love is at the heart of healthy community and understanding that we belong in it. Jesus is calling us to show up as our true selves, as image bearers of Christ who can be no one other than who we really are. And as people who are marked by the cross of Christ and sealed with God's promise forever, we are called to go out and share that good news with the rest of the world. That the world may not always want you to be who you are, but God needs you to be. There's just no getting away from it. God loves you. You are claimed as a beloved child of God, part of a community of beloved children of God, an intrinsic part of this world that cannot and should not be hidden. Salt can't help being salty any more than light can help being bright. Without salt, our food would taste awful. Without light, we'd be running into things all the time. Salt and light are essential pieces of life. And so are you. And being who you are, loving who you are enough to be able to really love the people around you too, that is the fulfillment of God's law. If we don't hide ourselves away or pretend to be someone we're not, then we don't ask others to do that either. And while that might sound a little wishy-washy in a world that demands so much hardness, the kind of love Jesus is talking about requires both strength and vulnerability. Strength because if I really love myself and my neighbor, I won't allow the world to crush God's beloved creation. Vulnerability because if I'm going to really, truly be who God has created me to be, then I have to be willing to accept the risk of failure and rejection, being seen. That is the marker of the beloved community, proclaiming that we are all named and claimed and loved. You are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. You have a part to play in this extraordinary life and time, and you are worth noticing. Amen.